Hello everyone, welcome to my speaking. And today I'm going to share a piece of my research, advanced heap manipulation in Windows 8. And my name is Zhenhua Liu, you can call me Eric. I'm a security researcher at Fortinet. And this is the agenda of this talk. Part 1, why I start this research. I will briefly introduce some security features in the Windows 8 and the limitations of the traditional heap manipulation and lead to the target of this research. And part 2, quick view of the idea. And part 3, implementation. Memory corruption vulnerability are getting more and more difficult to exploit, thanks to exploit mitigation improvements introduced in modern operating system. These big names, the DEP, ASCR, and Sandbox are as familiar as pop stars to security researchers. So I want to talk about the Sandbox a little bit more here. The sandbox technology is not new, but with its getting mature in recent years, there's indicate that more and more applications will integrate the sandbox in the future, and following the Adobe Reader X, Microsoft IE, and Google Chrome. And so maybe in the future, the exploit will be categorized into two groups: the sandbox bypassed exploit and the sandbox not bypassed. There are several ways that could bypass the sandbox and pushes my research work to these directions. The kernel vulnerability and a third-party plugin which are not implementing inside the sandbox to find the vulnerability in there. And the sandbox vulnerability itself. And respectfully speaking, the sandbox technology could be marked as a milestone in computer history, as it has increased the cost of attack into an amazing degree and makes the cost of attack and the benefit attacker will gain balanced. Let's turn our face to the kernel side. Although the Windows 8 kernel looks like a well-patched Windows 7 kernel, but its improvements are tremendous. Almost every public known exploit method in kernel pool overflow have been killed by these improvements. Now dereference protection. Attackers cannot map the no memory address anymore. Integrity checks. The attacks that are trying to compromise the metadata have been killed, and non-paged pool and SMAP. Attackers have to find the better way to place their shellcode and enhance the ASCR. To exploit in the kernel pool is much more difficult than ever. The metadata in the user heap have been well protected before Windows 8, and in the Windows 8, it have introduced the non-determinism. With the introduction of the randomized LFH allocator, and the heap manipulation is difficult in Windows 8 user heap. And what's left to the attackers? This picture is copied from Matt Miller's slide. On your left side, a coalesce on link overwrite. That was our good old days to have generic heap overflow, but it had been killed by siphon linking in 2004 with the introduction of Windows XP SP2, and this year is the 10th anniversary of its death. It is foreign attacks trying to compromise the metadata by attacking the locus address attacking the free list, attacking the heap cache, and so on. With the comprehensive protection and integrity checks, which was introduced in Vista, Windows 7, and Windows 8 step by step, they have been killed. And what's left? To attacking the custom memory allocator, it's not on the picture. To attacking the custom memory allocators in applications, I have two questions to this custom memory allocator. Have you well protected your metadata? Have you introduced the non-determinism? Attackers are trying to attack the new metadata, which introduced with the new LFH allocator. But it is underprotected by the guard pages in Windows 8. And what's left? Application-specific data attacking. As the applications are various, it's almost impossible to protect every data they're using, and that's a feature of the exploit and use after free. People could hear it from the zero-day news from time to time. And these two kinds of attacks, application-specific data attacking and use after free, are greatly rely on heap manipulation. And benchmarks have said application-specific data attacking are the future. And what is application-specific data attacking? Like on this picture, we have the vulnerable buffer in the yellow area, and we overflow it and trying to compromise some data structure in the red area and lead to code execution. And the most important part is these two parts are adjacent in memory. And how to achieve that? How to achieve heap manipulation? People have created a heap function. The first word is Mandarin, and which means feng as a wind, shui as water. This picture, we have a nice wind, nice water, beautiful view. Do you want to live in it? And the feng shui is a traditional art which was born in China 3,000 years ago. It is a complex body that is trying to balance the energies of a given space to assure the health and good fortune for people who live in it. And I guess Alexander take use of this word into computer is to trying to find a better place for the vulnerable buffer to assure the health and good fortune for the exploit, like have a better price. It normally have 3 steps, the traditional heap function. Let's see, we have the vulnerable buffer, which size is 0x200 bytes. And the first step is to defragment the heap using lots of allocations of this size of block. The early allocations will come from the gaps. And after these gaps being exhausted, a new allocation will come from the new extended area and adjacent. Then by freeing some of them to make whole, and when allocate the vulnerable buffer, it will fall into one of the hole we made before, and the object as red color is just behind it. But it has some limitations in kernel pool and in Windows 8 user heap. In the kernel pool, we cannot always find the kernel object, which size is the same as a vulnerable buffer, and it also contains important data structure that could lead to code execution. And in the user heap of Windows 8, the defragment process will trigger the LFH for this size, and when allocate the vulnerable buffer, it will go into another way, a randomized way, and not fall into the hole we made before. So the target of this research is to let the arbitrary vulnerable buffer adjacent with arbitrary data structure and without triggering the LFH in the user heap. So let's go into the part one, the quick view of the idea. Matt was the paper, Windows Objects in Kernel Vulnerability Exploitation, gave me lots of help to understand the relationship between kernel object and its exploitation, and left something for me to think about. How can we place a desired object just behind the vulnerable buffer? Can we place something else other than object just behind the vulnerable buffer? Before I describe the idea, it is good to warm up with some basics, and only the basics that related to this idea will be talked. It will not take too much of your time and make you bored, hopefully. So firstly, I want to introduce the free list. The heap manager maintains several doubly linked lists to track the free blocks in the heap. The free blocks with the same size will be linked into one of these free lists. The free lists makes the allocation and the deallocation operations very fast and simple for allocation. The allocator will scan along the free lists for the first fit, then unlink it using nesting first out manner. But it has some drawbacks. The free lists have some drawbacks from a security point of view. The free lists relies upon metadata, which also providing excellent attacking surface. And the last in first out manner it used, providing zero allocation entropy, thus a perfect predictability. And free lists are still being used in both kernel pool and user heap in the Windows 8. So how to control the free lists? Do you know how sushi belt works? The chef prepares the sushi and put it on the belt. The customer on another side will pick and eat the sushi. What if another customer, who's a disgusting guy, and put a fake sushi on the belt? The customer will still pick and eat the fake sushi. So let's consider the free list, which works like the sushi belt, and even worse, it is transparent to the users. So the user will pick and eat the fake sushi, no matter who put it on. So how to write into the free list? How to write into the sushi belt? There are three ways that could write into the free list: direct free, split when allocating, and coalesce when free. When direct freeing a block, it will be linked into one of the free lists. But which one? It is only related to its size. So that is to see, when direct free a block, it could write into the one and only free list. But for split and coalesce have a different story. When the free space is larger than needed, a split big chunk process will take place. It will pick from the front or the end of the free space to serve the allocation and link the unused fragment into the free lists. As the size of the unused fragment is calculated, so the free lists it will be linked into is calculated. So by taking use of the free list searching and a split big chunk process as a compilation, I have solved the previous problem by this mandatory search technique. 1, force the free list searching taking place. 2, force the search result always greater than requested. This is a mandatory search technique in the kernel pool allocation. When the allocation request comes, the allocator will check its size to decide which strategy for allocating. If it's a small size, the look-aside searching will take place first. Here, by empty the look-aside list, we could force the free list searching taking place. And during the free list searching, by empty the free lists, which have the exact match, we could force the search result always greater than requested and force the split big chunk process taking place. That is to say, we could dynamically write into the free lists when allocating. This is a simple example. Our target is to let the vulnerable buffer, which size is 0x200 bytes, and adjacent with the directory object, which size is 0xC0. So the initial status of the kernel pool looks like this. Lots of free pages and lots of gaps. And by lots of allocating of 0x808 blocks, we could defragment the kernel pool like this, and left the 0x7F8 free blocks, lots of them, and allocate 5F8 and make 0x200 whole and take over these holes and free 5F8 and allocate 538 block and make 0xC0 whole. That's for the directory data structure. And taking these holes by lots of allocation of these directory objects. And let's make holes for the vulnerable buffer. So when allocating the vulnerable buffer, it will fall into one of the hole I made before, and the data structure 0xC0 is just behind it. And let's watch the demo. Let's pick a size. How about 800? So that's a first step. Before that, I want to check the privilege of this application. It is here. It is low integrity, which means it is a very low privilege, and it could be launched in the sandbox process. And let's watch the kernel debugger. This breakpoint is actually an allocate place function, allocate function in the kernel pool. And I'm going to print out the return address of every allocations. And let's go the first step. Here we go. Yeah, there's lots of allocations, and let's check them. AAA, AAB, AAC, AAD, and these are the continuous pages. And I will describe why it looks like this in the later part. So let's disable the breakpoint and jump to the end to watch the result. Here we go. This is before the allocating the vulnerable buffer. To describe how reliable this method will be, I have continuously allocated 50 vulnerable buffer. And let's watch what have been allocated. And here we go. They are our vulnerable buffer. And let's check what's behind it. -8, it's a header, and 64 is its size, and let's jump over it, times 8. The directory object is just behind it. Let's pick another one. The same directory object is here. How about this one? Directory object. So looks our target have been achieved in this part. So let's continue. Even have this idea on hand, one might still encounter numerous problems when implementing. So in the following sections, I will discuss the implementation in the kernel and the user heap separately, and more reliable nodes for this method could be found on the white paper later. We have seen this picture before. It's a kernel pool allocator. When allocating request comes, it will check its size, and it will be categorized into small, medium, and large allocation. And there are different strategies for each of them. And it's very straightforward on this picture. This method has some prerequisites. Allocate buffer of arbitrary size and free buffer of arbitrary size. Control the allocation and the deallocations using user mode code. From the user end point of view, we cannot say anything about the kernel layout. So the first question is, how can we control or affect the kernel layout using user mode code? The idea is to find some native APIs or activities like network packet receiving that could actually allocate or free the memory from the kernel pool. And for the paged pool, the APIs that could allocate the Unicode string is a good fit like this. It is called create symbolic link object. And for free, by direct close this handle, we could achieve that. Let's recall the allocation progress for the Xerox 808 block. As it's medium size, So the free list searching will take place first. And after lots of allocations of this size, the free lists will empty. And the kernel pool will be expanded using this function, mi allocate pool pages. As we can see, the second parameter 0x1000 is hard-coded, which means this is a brand new page. And furthermore, after allocating the 0x808 blocks from the new pages, the free space left, 0x7f8, cannot satisfy the future allocation of this size, and a new page will be expanded again and again. So that's the reason we have seen that in my previous demo. And to allocate the pages from virtual address is controlled by the bitmap. There are some important functions and structures that's using in the bitmap search. Briefly speaking, the bitmap will be searched for continuously free blocks to serve the allocating request. If it's one page, it will come from here, and 2 pages, and 3 pages. And both in 32-bit version of Windows and 64-bit version of Windows, there's no randomness being added in the bitmap search, which result in the continuous allocating the pages from the virtual address. And we have seen the continuous the address in the demo. And if every search failed in the 32-bit version of Windows, the virtual address will be dynamically expanded. And this results in the high address, a relatively high address, could be achieved only through heap splitting. And I will talk about it later. The picking sequence when splitting is very interesting too. This is an empty page. And the first allocation from the empty page will come from the first, and left the free blocks left on the end. But the following allocations, the second one, third one, will come from the end and let the 0x200 holds just in the middle. Let's recall our controlled way. If it's a small pool allocation, it will go to the look-aside list searching, and by empty the look-aside list, I could force the free list searching. And during the free list searching, I will empty the free lists which have the exact match and force the split big chunk process taking place, and split chunks right into the free lists when allocating. If it's a medium allocating, it will go from this. So let's talk about the size. I have just talked the 0x200 vulnerable buffer. What about the other sizes? Actually, these allocations could be categorized into these groups, smaller than 0x400, which is the same as 0x200 allocation, and between 400 and 800, and between 800 and FF0, and larger than FF0. For the time reason, I cannot detail them, but these strategies for each of them are very, very similar, and you could figure it out from the white paper or the slides offline. Demo of this section. Well, wrong typing, it will come later. And let's go to the exploitation part. To utilize a Windows object for kernel vulnerability exploitation is to find some data structure like function pointer index, then use overflow vulnerability to modify it. For example, in the Windows 7, the type index in the object header is a nice choice, and a code execution could be achieved when calling close handle at here. And as this object is controlled by us, and before this memory being freed, it could lead to code execution before the system crashed. And in the Windows 8, the Matthew's way is to attacking the function pointer in the timer object. And let's watch the demo now. This demo is loaded kernel driver, which is written by myself. It's overflow. It contains overflow vulnerability, and I loaded this driver to trigger the overflow vulnerability to demonstrate how to lead to code execution. And to load this driver, I need the administrator. Well, we're here. Whoa. Looks we have controlled the code execution already, and the most important is to check the buffer's allocation, and if the desired object is just behind the vulnerable buffer. So the vulnerable buffer have been allocated at this address, and let's checking it. 88D1181 minus 8. That meaning, which means this vulnerable buffer was allocated by my driver. And let's jump out its size, 40 times 8. That's a timer object just behind it. So let's check the if we have executed into the shellcode. The shellcode have been allocated at 86EA0928, and that's the EIP. It's the same as 86EA0928, which means we have controlled the code execution. And it's here already. So I'm going to stop this snapshot for future use. And there's one more part to exploiting the write what where vulnerability. The key factors for, my VMware on the snapshot is on the laptop is very slow. The key factor to exploit this vulnerability is to place the data structures at a predictable address. Let's see, it's this address. It is a relative high address, which could be achieved only through heap spree. And our kernel manipulation method could help us to place object like this. And we could place the object at the 0x48, and this street address could be calculated. And it's very simple, and I don't need to demo it, I think. So the last part, implementation in the user heap. This is a user heap allocator, and it's very similar to the kernel allocator. When allocation request comes, depends on its size, it will be categorized into small, medium, and large. There are two important values, 0x4000 and 0x7FFFF, to categorize these allocations into small, medium, and large. When the allocation size smaller than 0x4000, the AFH allocator will be checked first to see if it's being activated for this size. If not, the backend allocator will be used. And let's go to the attacking part. To practical attacking heap user data user header, this data structure is the new metadata, which introduced in the new LFH allocator. This idea was brought by Chris, and as a note, to compromise the metadata is to try to compromise or attacking the data that is not underprotected, like block stride and the first allocation offset. They are plain text and no integrity check. So if these two data being modified, the future allocations will be controlled by us. But it's not easy. There are two challenges. 18 times of allocations will trigger the AOFH for the vulnerable buffer. And 400 times of allocations will trigger the guard pages, and it will like this. When they have been triggered, the vulnerable buffer will be randomly be located at one of the block, and we don't know where is it. And if lots of overflow taken place and overflow into the guard pages, and it will raise the exception, and the game is over. And so the target of this part is to let the vulnerable buffer just be before these data structures without triggering the AOFH and without triggering the guard pages. There are some discoveries I have found, and by taking use of this, I realized I might be able to bypass these challenges by taking use of this mandatory search like this way. One, when the allocated size between 0x4000 and 0x7FFF, and the backend allocator will be used, there's no randomness being added in the backend allocator, and we could defragment the heap using the backend allocator. And furthermore, the split big chunk process still exist in the backend allocator. For example, by freeing 0x70,100 blocks and allocate 0x70,000, and we could make 100 whole. And the most important part is we did nothing to affect the LFH. And the third one is the size of the user block. I mean the total size, including the header, every block's the total size is a relative fixed value. For example, there is 200 heap bucket. The first time the LFH being triggered, its size is 0x1FF8, and this value you will see it later. And plus header, the heap header, it will be 0x2000. And by making use of this mandatory search technique in this way, first one, defragment the heap using the backend allocator. The X8000 is larger than the X4000 and its backend allocator. We could defragment the heap by freeing the second to the last and allocate the X6000 blocks. We could make this hole. And this hole is for the user block, for the heap bucket 0x200. And then, by lots of allocations of 0x200 blocks, it will fall into the hole we made. That's user blocks. And first, take a closer look at. That's a header, every user blocks, and we almost be there. And free this block and allocate 5D00, and we could make a hole there. That's for the vulnerable buffer. So when allocating the vulnerable buffer, it will fall into this hole, and the header is just behind it. With these data have been, I have mentioned before, being modified. So the future allocations will jump out these user blocks, which is supposed to be, and jump into the red area, which controlled by us. And they have some prerequisites in this part. The most important was the AOFH of this vulnerable buffer size have not been activated by the time of allocation. Simply speaking, it's in a pure POC, no heap spree, no heap feng shui, just triggering the vulnerability. When allocating the vulnerable buffer, by that time, the AOFH have not been triggered yet. And to allocate buffer of arbitrary size, free buffer of arbitrary size, programmatic control of allocations and freeze. That is to see the best place to use this technique is in the client application like browser. So let's recall the exploitation process. Let's figure out the vulnerability to figure out if the vulnerable buffer have been triggered, the LFH for this size have been triggered. And if this vulnerability allows us to overflow into the data I mentioned before, if yes, let's build the heap layout using this new heap function and trigger the overflow, modify these data, and allocate the new object with the controlled size. And these allocations will jump into the area, the red area we have controlled before. And we could modify the content and finally control the EIP. And let's watch the demo. These allocations are the first step to defragment the heap using a backend allocator, and let's pick some of them. C0, C8, D0, D8, E0, E8. They are adjacent to each other and continuously. So then here, we're going to allocate these data structures. This breakpoint is the place where allocated the user blocks. Oh, sorry. I should enable 0. Let's go back. Sorry. here we go. And we can check this parameter is 1f8. And I have mentioned before that's a total size. It have been allocated at this, at there. So the following step is to check if this allocated address is falling to the hole we made before. And the hole is there. 0x81E048. And that's the thing. So it's falling to the hole. And the following steps is to trigger the vulnerability and control the future allocations and yeah, we can check the future allocations that here and what this address is. Its size is 0x2000, the user block. So this is the end of the user block. The allocation is supposed to be. But these new allocations, its size is 0078. It's not than that. We have jumped out this place and jumped into the area I have controlled. And the future allocations. Then I can control the EIP. Like here. So let's just see the pure POC without. So yeah, we have controlled the code execution here. And let's go to the last section, the practical heap determining in IE10. Actually, the idea used in this is very similar as before. And I have taken use of the canvas to the 2D object to allocate and free the user heap instead of us. And it is learned from the HTML5 heap screen. And this is for the demonstration purpose, and it could only write into and control the CRT heap. So before that, attach the debugger on it. This is actual place where the memory being allocated, actually. And after that, I'm going to print out every address. So allocating 0x8000, and there are these allocations. And that's the same. It's adjacent to each other. And make holes. So the last step is to allocate the vulnerable buffer, which size is 0x200, and I have allocated 5 of them to see what have been allocated. They're here. Let's check its content. Before it, it's our controlled place, and after it, it's our controlled place. Let's check this one. Yeah, that's the same. So which means if we could find something like the data structure that contains the function pointer and which size actually allocated size could be controlled by us to find this one and to using them to prepare the heap and place the vulnerable buffer fall into the hole and trigger the overflow. And what the data it could be overflow into is our controlled data structure. So it is good to see the Microsoft have introduced the non-determinism in the Windows 8 user heap, and it's far away from the end. As I have demoed, we could achieve reliable heap manipulation in user heap in some circumstances, and reliable kernel pool manipulation. So this is the end of this talk. Do you have any question?
On 64 bits, there is the highest ISLR situation is the same or not?
Oh, it's similar. It's the same, yeah. The only thing different is the header or some data structure, its size. Like, you just modify it a little bit, and you can use it on the 64-bit. So.
In second demo, you showed that in the buffer that the EIP points, there is your just payload, just interrupt free. But how you manage to control allocation of executable pool from the user mode?
Sorry?
Okay, can you show a second demo?
Yeah, sure.
It's about where kernel.
But I have to restore the snapshot for a kernel debug. It takes a little bit long because moved the VMware out. Yeah.
My question was, point of the demo was to show that the IP under control, or because on Windows 8, because caused by SMEP, you have to,
Oh, yeah. You mean?
Ideas where to store your payload.
Oh, actually, where to store the payload, where to store the shellcode is out of this research scope. So I just allocated. Yeah. So maybe we can check it later offline. Yeah. So thanks for coming. Oh.